Welcome back to another episode of the Business AI Playbook podcast, where we explore how companies actually implement AI and drive real transformation. In today's episode, we're joined by Erik Schmidt, a transformation expert who's worked with companies like Pandora, Lego, and HSBC. At Pandora, he faced a massive challenge: over 125 disconnected systems holding critical people data, making it nearly impossible to get a clear view of the business. In this conversation, we break down how they fixed those foundations, why that was essential for any AI initiative, and what leaders can learn if they want to drive real impact. All right, here we are, and we already have Erik here in the studio. Welcome, Erik. Thanks so much for coming here today. I was really looking forward to this conversation.
Great to be here with you.
Really appreciate the chance. And why don't we start with sharing a bit more about your background? Because I would say you continuously evolved. Maybe I could say that you transformed your career in the last years, right? And can you tell our audience a bit about the major milestones in your career and how you kind of arrived to the position you are in today?
Yeah, no, happy to. And so currently I run my own consulting and advisory business called Erik Schmidt Consulting. There I work with CEOs, chairmen and investors on business transformation. So it could be growth stories, it could be M&A activity, or sometimes businesses get into trouble and they need to turn around. So transformation takes many forms, and I love that work. It's fascinating work. In addition, I run my own podcast, as you know, Transformer CEOs, and that's great fun too, meeting people, men and women from all over the world who've done amazing things with their organization and with their people.
Thanks for inviting me as a guest there. Make sure to check out the episode because I had a fantastic chat with Erik talking about some of the challenges of being a CEO and also the opportunities that one could have in transforming their own business. So I really enjoyed that.
It's a great story. Colossyan's an amazing story, and it's amazing to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, and could you share a bit more about your previous experiences?
Yeah, so my consulting work is based off really the last 30 years working in the corporate world. I'm lucky enough to have worked for some of the leading players in their sector. So businesses like Diageo in the drinks industry, Lego in the toy industry, HSBC in the banking industry, and latterly Pandora, the world's largest jewelry company by volume. And all of the briefs I've had have shared some common DNA, which is typically working right at the sharp end of those businesses, helping to make one of those transformations I mentioned earlier happen. I skipped my experience at GE, for example, where I was heavily involved in M&A work, buying and selling and integrating companies in healthcare and in media. So I also have the benefit through my experience of working now in, I think, 5 or 6 different industry sectors as well, which is a great test, if you like, for your muscle strength. You know, can you really deploy what you do, not just in one sector, but across a range of industries? So I like that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, so some massive companies, and you've been at the, I would say, steering wheel, making tough decisions and unlocked great opportunities. The reason why I was really excited about today's chat is because we've been talking about some of the great stuff that you can do with AI so far in this podcast, and we touched upon many of the, I would say, options that you can do, but I would say none of that is relevant in case you don't have the right data. And one of the stories that you highlighted to me was when you had I would say a massive gap in your observability or just transparency and access to the right data points. Could you introduce that challenge to us and how?
Yeah,
how
it's such an important one. I say I'm a data guy. I think I like analytics, or maybe even more than that. I like the insights that you can get from analytics and data. And we always want our insights to be born on fact as much as possible. Insights which are a belief or something we wake up with in the morning are never a great way to run a commercial organization. And so getting people data, in my case, was super important. So just to go back a few years, the context was Pandora, where I was Chief People Officer. as a member of the exco, so the 7-person exco that led the company. So, as well as running a function, I also had an enterprise responsibility, and that's a really important feature to focus on. But I remember getting there, I think it was my first or second week, and I inherited a project which was already running in the company, which was about a new people or HR system. So I'd been involved in many such projects in the past with other blue chip companies. And so I kind of felt I knew what to look out for. And I remember going to the first project meeting and I asked some fairly basic questions like, what's the scope of this work? And there was a lot of shuffling of papers. I then asked the question, what's the budget for this project? And I got 3 different numbers. And then I asked, who's leading this project? And there was a lot of kind of finger pointing. And I said, who's sponsoring this project? And it was Tumbleweed, right? So I thought, I did something I've never done before, and I cancelled the project, which was a bit counterintuitive because in my mind, this is exactly the thing we needed to do.
Sounds like.
But there's nothing worse than a castle that's built on sand.
Oh.
So it's better to stop the project, regroup, and go back with a much clearer mandate. At the same time, though, I had a very important conversation with my peers on the executive team. Because what was apparent to me was the company was in turnaround mode. Pandora was underperforming back in 2019. And if we look at it from a commercial point of view, we had nearly 30,000 employees, or so I thought, in 40 different markets. And people cost was the biggest line item in our P&L. So we spent more on people than we did on anything else by quite some margin. It's a people business. And so to make the transformation work, we needed, as an executive team, we needed to have visibility and transparency on our people. Not just what did it cost, but who was in there, how were they performing, where were they, where were our liabilities, who had succession and potential and who didn't, and many more things. And so getting the bedrock of great people data to support the transformation was absolutely mission critical. So I remember the conversation I had with my executive team peers, which was, there's a data project running in the people space. Do you know anything about it? And I think 2 hands went up around the exec team table, and that's not a good start, right? Particularly as, we had some leaders around that table who had 10,000 people in their organizations, and they knew nothing about this. So I told them I've stopped the project, but I think this is absolutely mission critical for the transformation, so we need to restart this project. But I would like it to be sponsored from the executive team. We'll scope it together, we'll sign it off together, we'll make sure it's ranked in the projects, the tech projects that we're going to do in the next couple of years. Then we'll put a proper team together and we'll get moving with it. So that's what we did. 12 months later or so, we did one of the largest and most accelerated implementations globally of a SuccessFactors product. And within 12 months, we had master data for all 30,000 employees. And that was absolutely mission critical. But running in parallel, I remember another conversation that I had. I was invited to the audit committee as the new chief people officer for the company. And they wanted to kind of kick the tires with the new guy and ask me a few testing questions. So one of the questions I remember specifically was, so Erik, how many people are there in Pandora? And I said to them, I don't know. And I was expecting the question. But they said, well, that's quite shocking. You're the chief people officer. Why don't you know the answer to this? And I said, well, the reason I don't know the answer is because today we have 125 platforms around the company with people data in them that don't talk to each other and don't talk to me. So there's no global oversight for the 30,000 people we have in the business today. And that, I think, shocked them. Nobody had ever reported that. Nobody had spoke truth to power, if you like, in quite that way. Their next question was to me was, how can you guarantee from a data protection point of view that our employee data is secure? And I said, I can't. How could I with 125 platforms? But then the conversation morphed into a slightly more positive conversation to say we now are rescoping this project. We're going to kickstart it. We're going to get this implemented over the next 2 years. And in time, you should be able to ask me that question, and I'll be able to give you a much more robust answer, which, of course, we were able to do in time.
It's a great story, but would you say that this is a common problem in the industry, based on your experience, as well as companies evolve and possibly grow quickly, that they kind of reach this challenge?
I suspect the picture is mixed, to be honest. I think some will be fairly well advanced in this space and be doing some pretty cool things and getting amazing analytics and insights from their people data. I also think, and you prefaced your question with AI, I also think AI is going to force people down this track if they're not down there already. But I suspect there are probably some organizations, maybe small or medium sized businesses, which have not put a priority on this for one reason or another. Or maybe where some of the leaders there are not sufficiently tooled in terms of how do you make this a reality, where things are maybe less advanced. So I suspect it's quite a mixed picture out there.
And what do you think? What could an organization do, or some of their mid or senior leadership, like previous to this stage, like why they are growing and they are making these decisions? Like, what are your learnings that one could apply to kind of not make the most common mistakes and prepare for this much better, so projects like this can possibly even be avoided?
Yeah, well, I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I mean, I think the general message would be, if you've not done this work already, and it's essential work, it's not nice to do work, it's not optional work. Unless you have 5 employees or something, and this is, you can do it in a spreadsheet, then you need some kind of technology which is going to securely manage your master data for your global workforce. But it was interesting, at Pandora, we went on to do a global restructuring in the first year. At the same time as we were trying to launch this or embed this platform. It was a very demanding turnaround environment. And we ended up taking a cut of master data from those 125 systems and running a parallel data track while we worked through the transformation. When the transformation was finished and the restructuring was finished, that became the new master data, which we loaded into our new global platform, our cloud-based platform.
Would you do it differently, or do you think that was a wise
Ideally,
choice?
yes. I mean, ideally, you would have your master data well done and dusted, and then focus on your restructuring and your transformation, and then take it do an update. But we didn't have that luxury. So we literally, and I use this analogy a lot, we had to change the puncture while we were riding the bike. And that was the reality of where we found ourselves in 2019, 2020.
Yeah, that's clear. And when it comes to like I would say aligning the right resources and assigning this project to the right teams, are there any major learnings there, or areas that you would approach differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's essential that you have sponsorship from the top for this kind of program, and help leaders in the Exco understand that this is not some HR system. This is the people system for the company. So some clever person at Pandora branded this people portal. It's a SuccessFactors product, but it's branded inside the company as People Portal. It houses everything for people. So our succession planning, all our performance activity, all our master data, job vacancies, leave of absence applications, global intranet for the company. Everything now hangs out of this People Portal system, which is cloud-based. It was the first cloud-based system in the company as well. It's subsequently been joined by a global ERP, and it now links up to the ERP, which of course enables us to do many, many more things and start to link together commercial data, people data, customer data in a way that drives top and bottom line.
So I guess the major thing to do here is to build a business case and kind of prioritize it with the right urgency across the organization if there is a problem with access to this data. So when building the business case, would you say that the commercial element was the most I would say useful to highlight?
Yeah, yes and no. So the way I did it back then was I used some analogies, um, and I talking candidly to my executive team colleagues. So I said, look, we're the leaders of a 30,000 strong company. Um, I said to them, if we were to ask ourselves a fact-based question like, how many employees do we have, or how many of our 30,000 employees are with us emotionally on the journey to make this transformation happen, what would the answer be? And of course, none of us knew the answer to that question. But how can you go into a global transformation and a turnaround without knowing whether you've got 5, 10, 50, or 90% of the people with you? Because you're really flying blind. It's like a pilot in a plane and turning all the controls off and saying, don't worry, I'm going to get you to Los Angeles one way or another. Yeah, really? How's that going to work?
Yeah.
So that's the position we found ourselves in. And they said, yeah, this is crazy. 30,000 people, billions of kroner of spend every year, and we have no clue about anything. We need to address this. So actually, we got everybody on board almost intuitively. This was a must-do thing. And I didn't go in to negotiate. There wasn't a plan B. If there was no plan A, then how were we going to do the transformation?
Yeah.
And that was the way I approached it. So I think the advice to people is don't water down your ambition when it comes to things like this, because certainly when you want to go into more the AI space, you're going to need this. It's like running the company without financial data. It would be crazy to consider that.
Yeah, I'm really curious about the more niche kind of data points, because you mentioned like how many of the employees are emotionally bought in, or like more sophisticated skills that they might have. How did you approach uh, kind of uncovering those questions?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we agreed when we did our strategy work, and of course a big component of that with 30,000 employees was the people strategy. And we needed to understand whether people were on the boat or not, or if they had concerns. And if they had concerns, what were they about? And given we were going through, you and I were chatting about the refresh we did in the white collar population, 65% refresh in 2 years. So we wanted to know if people who were valuable employees would recommend Pandora as a place to work to their friends and colleagues in other companies, because we were heavily dependent on external talent at that point. So we developed, using our master data, we developed some very simple survey tools, which developed 2 metrics that we cared about most and that we put right at the top of our metric pile. Along with revenue growth, we put a metric which was employee net promoter score. And we also put leadership effectiveness score. So we recognized that people came and stayed because of the quality of their leader. If I had a great leader, I was much more likely to stay. I was also much more likely to advocate for the company to other folks who might be looking for a job change. So we wanted both those metrics to be as high as possible, to know that we had the right people on the bus and that they were supportive of what we were doing and they were engaged and excited and happy to be here. So we used our master data. We did surveys every quarter or every 6 months. We asked one question, which is the NPS question around would you advocate for Pandora with your friends and family? And we looked at the score and we tracked the score and we benchmarked the score externally. And latterly we got to the top decile of peer group companies. So we compared ourselves with other global consumer businesses. We were in the top decile. So our raw NPS score globally was about plus 60.
Wow.
Which was amazing.
Yes.
When we started measuring, it was about plus 20, plus 30, which we thought was good, but not great. And over 2 or 3 years, we got it to plus 60. So we really moved everybody's engagement and advocacy much higher. But we also learned an awful lot about our leaders. Because we knew in the hierarchy in the system who reported to who, as long as there was minimum responses, we could generate a report. So if you were my boss and you had a team of 6 and I was one of your team members, as long as at least 4 of us responded to the question about your leadership, you would get a report from your team every 6 months about your leadership effectiveness, which became very powerful. So if you had attrition in your team, we might know why.
Yeah.
If you were curious about what your impact was on your direct reports, you could read the report. And the report had only 6 questions in it, and it was numerical and comment driven. So you could get an instant feedback. Now, you should be asking your team in a team meeting anyway. You don't need just a survey. But it gives you an opportunity to pulse over time, how am I doing?
Yeah.
And as an exec team, we made this some of the most important metrics in the company, alongside EBIT margin and top line growth.
It's really great kind of way to approach collecting all those data points and nominating the ones that are really priority one. Thanks for sharing that aspect. From here, I would like to converge into the other topic that I would say I was excited to discuss today, which was kind of the afterthought, the post action of making the foundations right, which was related to your commercial functions performance data. And I believe without this project, that wouldn't really have been possible.
No, absolutely, and it goes to what you asked me a moment ago about putting the early building blocks in place. If you put those early building blocks in place, some of the more AI-driven applications that can come subsequently become much easier. So one project I remember I worked on just before I left the company, I retired from Pandora in 23, was a linkage between employee performance data from this same platform with store footfall data, with also peak trading data as well, times, places, dates, etc. And what we were able to do, and if you think about it, the concept is actually quite simple. I guess if you were a football manager, and you were going into a cup final, you would want to make sure you had your best players going on the pitch for that particular match. And that's simplistically what we were doing, except we had 2,500 stores around the world. And although we had around 12,000 retail staff, that number doubled at peak trading periods like Black Friday and Christmas. And so somehow we had to orchestrate so we had our best retail talent in the stores when we knew the footfall and conversion was likely to be highest, so that we could hit or max out on our revenue targets. And that was one of the strategic workforce planning AI applications that we developed in 23. And it became incredibly powerful. From 23 and 24, the company delivered double-digit revenue growth. And part of the reason for that was because of the work we did on lining up best performers with peak trading times in a way that we'd just never been able to do before.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and I would say a clear example of why having the right foundations mattered. How would you recommend others to advocate for? I would say this project was quite easy to sell or to kind of propose. That's my perception.
Yeah, I mean,
assumption.
The reality of it is, and your selling point's important. The reality of it is, in a large company, there are always more projects, tech projects, than there is ever budget or capacity to deal with in the system. And this was a big one, because if you think, we were involving 4 or 5 global functions, all the retail staff, a big chunk of the tech staff, a big chunk of the HR organization. So there was a lot of people power, if you like, in this project as well. And there were 6 others that were making similar claims. But I think where this one became compelling was we were making a pitch for what this would do for top line, and consequently also bottom line. And Pandora has a 25% EBIT margin. So if we could put 100 million, for every 100 million we put on the top line, we could put 25 on the bottom line. That became very compelling. But that's what I would suggest to people who are trying to advocate for this kind of project. You've got to get into the commercial mechanics of how the business operates and think about, if you can't do it on a large scale, do it on a small scale. Think about a store or a group of stores, or if you don't have stores, maybe you have a manufacturing plant, or you have a white-collar based team, whatever makes sense in your business. And then you have to make some assumptions about if we can optimize What can that do for top and bottom line? And that's where you can partner with finance colleagues and other colleagues in the business as well to make sure your numbers are really strong. And then have the courage of your convictions. A lot of transformation is about courage. We don't always know the right answer, but we know maybe a range of possible answers that can drive a great outcome. And that was the approach I always took. I debated it a lot with my team. I debated it with other parts of the business. And then I went into the Exco and I said, we've got something really exciting to talk about. I think it's going to drive huge success for our teams and for our top and bottom line. Let me talk to you about it.
Yeah.
And then let people kick it as well. That's an important part of the process.
My assumption is that if you kind of bring a hypothesis like this back to the original data foundations project, your people portal project, it becomes easier to sell because then you can kind of highlight capabilities you can do to also move revenue, right? So is it a correct assumption that if you connect the dots earlier on, it's even more powerful to drive that in the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true. We weren't a steady state company, to be honest, as you know. So we were in massive transformation, really everything needing to be fixed in some way, at some point in the company. So I wouldn't claim that we went into it promising these kind of footfall revenue enhancing benefits. Maybe if I'd had more mental capacity in the early months of the transformation, we might have painted that long-term vision. But if you are in a steady state company, then maybe you have more capacity to engage people in a longer-term vision for this. But we find it became iterative. So once we'd done one thing, that opened the door to 3 other things, and we did those 3 things. So we never left anything on the table. Yeah. And then once we'd done those 3 things, all of a sudden 6 more things became possible. And then when we got the ERP system implemented, of course, that was great because then our systems were talking to each other in the way that, back to that audit committee example I talked about, was just a dream. And then, these revenue enhancing projects became much more possible.
A question I get from our audience most of the time is how they could be better in articulating business value and proposing new transformations at their companies. I would say people definitely have the drive to execute change. I would like to ensure with these episodes we can help them with some tactical advice. You've been in the last year working with many CEOs, chairmen who are doing large-scale business transformations. What are learnings that our audience could apply from these conversations that you had or from the experience you had? What do you think? Even anybody in a given enterprise could learn from those cases.
Well, I think the first important thing is to be very clear on what the mandate is. So what is the business trying to achieve? That mandate usually comes from the board or from investors or from a chairman or there's somebody who is kind of setting direction. That's super important to get that clear because everything really needs to support that. If you can hook your ambitions and what you're trying to fix to that, you're already halfway there. Right? The second thing I would say is it's got to get into financial data at some point. There are a lot of projects I've seen, and they look like very worthy projects. It could be about turning around the company. It could be about a new product launch. It could be about opening in a new market. It could be about whatever. And sometimes people stop short of making the bold ambitions in financial terms. And there's justifiable reasons for that, very human reasons about people don't want to expose themselves. They don't want to, they don't want to take an overly risky position or something else, right? But in my experience, if you really want to move the dial on a big scale transformation, and that's what comes out in the podcast when I talk to CEOs as well. They all say, have a very clear vision and have the courage and if possible the mandate to go after it. So I would say those two things are probably vitally important. Some people, particularly in a functional capacity, whether that's in technology or whether that's in marketing or whether it's in HR or anywhere really, get a little hung up sometimes in my experience on what feels like the flavor of the month or what's the socially acceptable thing to do, or Joe's doing it, so we better do it. There's a kind of, peer competition or something. That's kind of irrelevant most of the case, unless there's some kind of reputational risk by not doing it, or we're going to lose market position or something like that. But if that is true, then make a point out of it, right? But that can't become the only reason for doing something. And I think where we can anchor it to mandate and anchor it in the financials of the company, it actually becomes quite compelling.
Mm-hmm. It's a really refreshing perspective, I think, because normally, based on the previous guest experience, they highlighted a different angle, and this is really, I would say, the executive angle. So that's also very useful to understand.
And I think it can, just to build on that, Dominik, it comes from, when you've sat in an exco for a company, and you'll know this from your own CEO-ship, you take everything from an enterprise perspective, not from a departmental or team or functional or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at things from an enterprise perspective. And that could also mean that sometimes you need to accept that although you might be very passionate about what you brought to the table, somebody else has brought something which is actually more important.
Yeah.
And so you need to part your ego and accept that actually my project is going to be number 2 on the list. Yeah. This one here needs to be number 1, and the reasons for that are clearly articulated.
That's clear, I would say. And from other learnings, because I really wanted to leave some room also for your experience in these recent advisory projects, mm-hmm. and the work that you conduct there. What are other learnings that you could share to our audience from these initiatives, and primarily the transformational projects?
Side? Well, I mean, the fascinating thing, and what's I think kept me hooked for the last 20 years or so in transformations is always the leader who's running the operation, who's taken on the brave mandate to turn, either an ugly duckling into a swan, or to turn a very small operation into something much larger, or to break into new markets, or to bring companies together that were historically competitors and now need to be bedfellows. Those mandates are fascinating. And I think it takes a certain type of leaders, and that's what I explore on the podcast, is a certain type of leaders who have the courage, the vision, the skill, who are hungry to learn, who are not quite satisfied, so have an impatience, if you like, a healthy impatience.
I listened to one of your episodes about this, and you highlighted that most of these, I would say, activities cannot really be delegated to a transformation, I would say, responsibility within your department or even in the C-suite. You have to be the one driving this, no matter if you are a CEO or a departmental leader, team leader, right?
I think that's spot on. If your brand and your business depends on a major transformation, whatever the nature of that transformation, if you're not owning that, sponsoring it, caring about it, recognizing people who are doing hard yards as part of that transformation, as CEO, then what are you focused on? Now, there are many facets to the CEO role, as you know, whether it's about raising capital, dealing with shareholders, talking in the community, hiring talent, developing world-class organizations. There are many angles to your role, and they all keep you super busy. But if you're driving a transformation and you don't own it and people don't believe that you own it, my bet is it's not going to happen. So the ownership, so while it's useful sometimes to have a chief transformation officer, I think for some people the risk is that can be a delegation opportunity rather than really sitting in the center of it and making your executive team accountable for the transformation. And there's various ways you can do that through goal setting and bonuses and long-term incentives and careers and many other things. But for a transformation to be successful, I've consistently seen CEOs sponsor it, executive teams co-sponsor it, and everybody feels like they've got skin in the game, and everybody wants it to be successful. So that would be one common thread I would point to.
That's I fully agree with this. So I would say thanks for bringing in that perspective. When it comes to major takeaways from this conversation, I think just getting the foundations there. In a previous episode I recorded about customer education, our guest highlighted Mark Ollert, kind of that when you kind of execute AI projects, it really uncovers your lack of documentation and how much gap there is in your current documentation. So I feel it's the same here as well, that you can't really do, I would say, really high impact projects without having ordering the house. That's definitely a major takeaway, and how to kind of sell that internally.
I would agree. I mean, a good example from Pandora as well was one of the things we realized, I've mentioned this already, is in peak trading times, retail numbers nearly doubled globally, our employee numbers, that is, nearly doubled. You can imagine Christmas stores with queues down the street. You need a lot of store staff to look after the customers. And so we find ourselves hiring massively all over the world. And if we didn't hire, we didn't have the staff. So it directly impacted revenue as well. But we were doing that very informally. Store managers were hiring all over the place. We had no consistent message. We had no way to track. We had no way to record. We had no way to have a paper trail or a tech trail of an audit trail of what was actually happening. And we implemented a system where people would apply. They would go through a series of questions, which were AI driven. They were developed through lots of dialogue internally about what we were looking for, what we liked, what we didn't like, so people could self-select in or out on applications. But the applications were progressed in a way that they would then be delivered to the store manager, let's say in October. So he or she could go through the list and say, yeah, I'd like to interview number 1, 3, and 5 on the list. The AI system would generate interview slots and calendars. That would all happen automatically, and the person would show up in the store for a conversation. If the store manager liked the employee, potential employee, they would say, I like this guy. Please progress to offer with a start date of December 1st, and they're going to do whatever hours a week. And that was all done. So all the admin and paperwork out of what's a really important process, getting high quality seasonal staff in for peak trading times, but which could soak the white collar population up a lot with fairly admin things where they could be doing far less admin things. Was another example of where just having great master data, having the systems and protocols in place, and having the tech capability to make it happen just paid enormous benefits.
Sounds truly magical. Thanks for highlighting that.
Listen, I'm sure these things all sound great when you pitch them, right? There are always day-to-day issues, of course, and I don't want to blow smoke here, but generally the store managers loved it. I think the candidates were very happy with it. The HR teams that had to somehow manage this day-to-day were hugely relieved, and we got the staff we needed. I think the funnel latterly was 200,000 in the funnel for 10,000 vacancies. So
huge quantity.
That's great.
Love these takeaways, Erik. Thank you so much. Where can people follow your work?
So I have a website, which is erikschmidt.co.uk, and there's a lot of details on there, including all my contact details. If you'd like to view some great CEOs in discussion, where I'm on the other side of the table normally, then Transformer CEOs is the podcast. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And people can watch along there too.
We definitely put that in the description. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time being here and this conversation. I think it was truly impactful for people facing relevant challenges.
Thank you, Dominik. Very kind of you.
Thank you. That was Erik Schmidt sharing what it really takes to make transformation and AI work in practice. If there's one takeaway, it's this. Without strong data foundations, none of the advanced use cases matter. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and share it with someone working on AI or transformation in their organization. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the